Hey everybody, Big Toad here and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to continue working on that sunset we started, and we're going to put in a mountain and some beautiful pine trees. Because of the bright sunset, you need to have a very dark silhouette of the mountain. So I'm going to start with a pretty deep purple that I made from Alizarin crimson and ultra marine blue. And because I'm using impasto and using a good loaded brush, I can go right over the top of my sunset without smearing colors or creating mud. The key to doing this is loading your brush effectively with enough paint. And when you're doing something large like a mountain, you can put a lot of paint on there. You don't have to be worried about getting too much on the brush. You'll be able to use it. Secondly, the consistency of the paint has to be soft enough that it will not pull and resist when it catches onto the brush strokes of the paint below it. And as you can see, this soft paint is just gliding right off my brush onto the sunset. I love the soft, buttery feel of oil paint coming off my brush. Sometimes though, you don't get that right out of the tube, no matter what brand you have, and a little linseed oil mixed in to your color is all it takes to create that buttery feel if you don't have it right out of the tube. And it doesn't take very much. I just dip the tip of my palette knife into it and mix that up really well. And if I need another dip, I just stick the tip of my palette knife right into that linseed oil, and then it butter up that paint. I've also mixed up a darker purple, and I'm going to bring that in over the top of these mountains to create some depth, the illusion of ridges and valleys, darken up the dark side of those mountains where they are opposite the sunlight. And again, the secret to be able to do this right on that wet paint is to have soft buttery paint and keep my brush loaded. Try to think about the contour of your mountain, where the valleys would be, and make those dark. And make sure you leave some high spots so that it is lighter. So this is to provide texture to your mountain, it's to provide depth to your mountain. And it doesn't hurt to use references. Google mountains and look at them and see how they're shaped, and maybe copy some of the valley shapes you see there. So you see, that's a really easy step. And now we're going to put in some pine trees. I'm going to show you a simple way to make a silhouetted pine tree against this brilliant sunset. We're going to create a small little line. I'm just using a flat. And now I'm going to tap back and forth with my brush, and I'm using the same purple that I used on the mountains, because these are going to be they're going to be very dark on this side. They're going to be pushed back in my painting. And then at the bottom of the tree, I'm going to go ahead and fill that in with that purple. Now I load that brush with just, again, I have to have enough paint on there, but I want to keep that brush thin and flat. And then I very carefully just touch that sharp edge of that brush to the canvas and make the trunk. And then I tap back and forth with the edges of the corners to make the illusion of the pine branches. And so I'm making these broken up pine trees so the sunlight can sift through the branches of the pine needles. That gives a real nice realism effect and provides depth, and I think it just really looks neat when you do it this way. So you will use the long beveled edge of the brush, and you will put in the trunk of the tree. You see what I'm doing there? And I'm using a very, very small brush here. And then I use the corners of it to drop some of that same paint to create the limb effect. And if you mess up, don't try to fix it. Just leave it. If you get too much paint somewhere, just leave it and start putting in more trees, and then come back and look at it. Your mistakes sometimes turn out to be your best trees. So you can see a little bit of practice, and this can make some really beautiful trees, especially when they're silhouetted like on a bright sunset, or the top of a ridge line against a blue sky, so that color behind it just glows through. And it can be a really beautiful effect. So making these silhouettes of these trees is really all about contrast. What are you putting your trees over, and is your color going to contrast? It just so happens a beautiful sunset is a great contrast for these types of pine trees. But you can find other colors that will contrast well. Use a lighter green over your dark deep forest to create more trees. And I'm going to come in this video and put some more. I'm going to layer the trees forward as we come forward, so you get multiple layers of trees, and you can see how they stand out, each layer on their own. So again, about this brush, I'm using a very small brush, but we're on an 8 by 10 board, and the trees are off in the distance. You don't have to use such a small brush as I'm using here. Use the brush size that's appropriate for the trees you're building and how big they are. I've used the same method on trees that are up very, very near to the front foreground, and it works just as well there. So it's all about your brush size as well. It's important when you're doing trees like this that there's randomness to the height, to the size, and I'm bringing these down a slope, which helps a lot. But still, I don't want them all to be the same size. I don't want them all to be the same distance apart. That's why sometimes you'll see me come in right between two trees and just put a tip coming up like there's a smaller tree between them. If this is your first time doing these kind of trees, hey, do a couple practice ones on a piece of cardboard, and you'll find that it's pretty simple and easy to do once you get the hang of it. Find a technique that works for you, the right combination of brushes. Make sure your paint's the right consistency so it comes off the brush easy. Loading your brush, you don't want to overload it, or you'll just put big clumps of paint on there. You can use that corner of your brush to use for the limbs. And so, yeah, practice. Get yourself a piece of cardboard or an old board and practice a few of these trees before you put it on the canvas. Nothing wrong with a little practice. So now that I got my trees in, I'm putting a little more foreground below them, putting some nice texture to that paint I put down at the base of those trees, because I'm going to come back in with another layer of trees right up to those, and you'll see me bring that other color in and how I can still create contrast. I'll come back and do a little touch up on the dark spots on my mountain using that same color I use for the trees. Now I'm going to come in with a dark green, and I'm going to start making trees just like I did with that purple, but I'm going to bring them right up into the bottom of my dark trees. And you can barely see this on the video. It is very close to the same color, but that green is going to build the shape of my next layer of trees. And then I'm going to come back over that and bring in some highlights onto those trees to, again, create depth and to separate these new trees from the trees in front of it. I put in that green all the way along the bottom of that ridge where I want my trees to go. And you can't really see the trees I'm doing yet, but you will. But they're a little larger tree shape than the ones I put on the farthest ridge line. On top of that dark green, now I'm coming in with a light bluish green, and I can start applying this bluish green paint on the green paint I already put down. In the video, it may look like that green paint I started with was of no value, but in real life, looking at it up close while I'm painting it, I can see the difference. And that green paint then also lifts up above the surface more than the silhouetted trees behind it. So that gives me a nice platform upon which to paint the next layer that I'm putting down now. I'm only then applying this bluish green to the surfaces of that dark green that's raised because of the brush strokes. So on this layer, I really don't have to make very many straight up and down lines or trunks. Or I can be less careful with them, because what I'm really after is the limbs and the shape of the tree. And I'm going to come back in on top of this one more time with more green paint to create more depth and contrast within this line of trees. So as we watch this in fast motion, you can see the trees taking shape. You can also tell that I'm losing some of those trees within the tree line, because I'm coming out with another layer on top of them. And so what I'm going to do to fix that, like I just said, is I'm going to come back in with a darker green and create some separation on this layer to make it a really beautiful tree line. So now with this same dark green, I'm going to come in and start creating some separation of the trees. I'm going to use this green to break that color up that I put down there, adding more depth to the tree line and creating more shadows in there. Now, I don't have to use green everywhere. If I feel like there's a spot where it looks good the way it is, I just don't put it there. This is to come in and again create that depth to it. So you can see now I'm starting to break that silhouette of all that light blue-green. And I can work some of that darker green around, creating texture, creating depth, creating shadow. And at any time, if your trees look good, stop. Sometimes I'll make my trees look good in 2 passes, sometimes it's 3. And every once in a while I'll come back and do a 4th. It all depends on the effect and the painting I'm working on. You know, this is more of an impressionistic painting style that I use, but when you take the time just to put in these details, the rest of the impressionism of the painting just comes alive without the details. So the painting's not about these trees, but still yet they're going to add so much life to the painting, and it's simple and it's easy. But I don't want this kind of detail everywhere. I don't want to do a painting with this detail everywhere. I want to mix the styles together to create life, to create some spontaneity to the painting, to create something for the eye, to catch the eye differently here and there, and yet I want it to all flow together. But you can use this style of trees in all different styles and types of painting you do. Whatever your style is, just incorporate some of this pine tree building ability into those, and to provide some spark of realism, of change, to provide a spark of something new and different in your paintings. I decided to go ahead and bring that ridge line down a little further in anticipation of my next step of the video series. I used the same process, started with the dark green, now I'm coming in with the bluish green to create closer. Now I'm coming with the dark green to break that bluish green up a little bit and create some shadows and depth. So we're just about done with this phase of the painting. I hope you learned something about how to build out these trees, and I think it's a great skill set. I think anybody can do this. Now let's take a closer look at the paint strokes and the contrast that we have, and I'll zoom us in a little bit. Now you should begin to see how the various layering of these colors created that depth to those trees. I'll zoom us a little closer in on the tree line. You can really see the depth and the texture in the brush strokes. It makes a really beautiful tree line. All right, that's all for this video. This is the Big Toad, and I am out.